Hi everyone, it's Alex, and today I wanted to review Pilgrim at Tinker Creek by Annie Dillard. This book entails a series of entries by Annie Dillard throughout the course of a year, and her obsession of documenting the changes in season, even to the point of somewhere in here she talks about wanting to watch the grass turn green overnight. And as the title might allude to, it's really about this place of Tinker Creek, which I think takes place or is in the Blue Ridge Valley in Virginia, which is a place I'm somewhat familiar with, as my friends and I, whenever we would go backpacking in eastern West Virginia, it's sort of close along toward the Blue Ridge Valley, sort of. So as Annie Dillard is obsessing over all of these places and talking about Tinker Creek and just nature and beauty, I really got along very well with that because I thought so well back to my own memories of backpacking. I've also read An American Childhood by Annie Dillard, I think it was a year ago, and I will say actually that Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, surprisingly I think, is actually even more personal than An American Childhood, which is Dillard's memoir. And I think for me it's because when reading An American Childhood, I know that Annie Dillard is using memory and remembering as a process of documenting detail, but in Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, where she's obsessing over all these details of nature, I feel like her memoir was more of a convenience to her for the sake of writing and craft, and this is much more about an intimate relationship with nature and then to a larger extension the world. If you watched one of my past wrap-ups, you would also know that I read For the Time Being by Annie Dillard, and the structure in there was very familiar to me, or at least I became familiar with Tinker Creek because in For the Time Being it also took on this very referential storytelling nature that Dillard seems to do. However, in For the Time Being, I felt a lot of shortcomings for me to be able to really like that book because a lot of it expressed many ideas of sort of theology and the spiritual, which Pilgrim at Tinker Creek also does, but I think in a much more accessible way. And I think a part of that is because Annie Dillard knows that her reader, which is me in this case, knows that I don't exactly always know what she's talking about in Tinker Creek, but she knows that I can maybe appreciate being there with her. She even says here in the book, "I have often noticed that these things, which obsess me, neither bother nor impress other people even slightly. I am horribly apt to approach some innocent at a gathering and, like the ancient mariner, fix him with a wild, glittering eye and say, 'Do you know that in the head of the caterpillar of the ordinary goat moth there are 228 separate muscles? The poor wretch flees. I am not making chatter, I mean to change his life.'" So clearly, even though I may not understand everything that Dillard is talking about in this book, I do become fascinated by how fascinated she is with what she's talking about, and there's certain parts in here that I really loved that sort of expand with her own ideas, and one of them, my favorite part in here was a section about the present, which is ultimately when we realize when we're older how we lose our sense of innocence. And about being in the present, Dillard goes on to say, "Self-consciousness is the curse of the city and all that sophistication implies. It is the glimpse of oneself in a storefront window, the unbidden awareness of reactions on the faces of other people, the novelist's world, not the poet's. I have lived there. I remember what the city has to offer: human companionship, Major League Baseball, and a clatter of quickening stimulus, like a rush from strong drugs that leave you drained. I remember how you bide your time in the city and think, if you stop to think, next year, I'll start living. Next year, I'll start my life. Innocence is a better world." To me, I got the impression, which is something I guess the whole idea of ignorance is bliss, is that Dillard, in nature at least, finds these very profound instances where nature creeps up on her, and it's always this sort of flurry of surprises where she realizes that by being by herself is an extension of being surrounded by so many people, because people might experience the world the same way in the sense of loneliness, or in this case, losing your innocence. And towards the end of this book, Dillard sort of seals the deal for me by talking about this idea of her life being nibbled away. And I think she uses this reference about how the world is a mason jar and we're all just bumping into each other in it. and she sees this mosquito on a copperhead and how our whole ecosystem works. It's kind of the same way with human beings. Dillard says that our fear of life isn't so much in death, but of how willing we are to feel gracious that we can feel emotions, as many living things apparently feel differently, especially with how we grieve. And as Dillard talks about all of these things in Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, I can't help but feel the same sense of discovery that she feels in this sort of stream of consciousness style, although that wouldn't be fair to say because there's definitely like a linearity here with how the book is set up, but it's sort of like what she writes is what I remember about how excited I feel about the world sometimes too. And I also love that Dillard acknowledges that even though she's obsessed with Tinker Creek in the Blue Ridge Valley, that she knows that Tinker Creek doesn't care that she's obsessed, and that the world, or I guess what she talks about like the creek, it moves all the time in its own force without her even seeing it, and the power of seeing, and how it moves at night and all the time, just like in the stories on our shelves that we have yet to read, and I think it's all just so great. If you've read Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, I would love to know what you think, and if you haven't, I would definitely pick it up. It might be too soon for me to say, but I think this is going to be one of my favorite books of the year. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.